Hi and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, back with a author conversation that is both a returning guest and someone new all at the same time. While it's really fun to get to bring a new guest onto the show, to bring back a returning guest that I've loved chatting with over the years, this conversation does deal with some heavier topics because the book is The Handmaid's Tale Psychology, Seeing Off-Red. The co-editors of this book are Dr. Travis Langley and Wynne Goodfriend, and so these two are both psychologists who really know what they're doing. They're digging into the issues, the values, the topics that the book and the show and also the movie, they even touch on the movie in this, that they all discuss and present for us. So there's a lot to learn both from this conversation and this book. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Travis Langley and Dr. Wynne Goodfriend. Well, welcome to Literary Hype. I'm so excited to have you guys on to talk about Handmaid's Tale Psychology, Seeing Off-Red. Oh, look, books.
Mine's over there.
Well, this is a very special book for me because you guys included me in the process on this in a really special way. Did you know before you asked me to blurb this book that I had put blurb a book on my vision board for the year?
No, did not.
So that worked out really well for me.
Worked out. Well, I mean, you're one of the regulars that we've been asking for a while. Would you like to see review copies of these books? And but I suspected I really need to make sure to get this one to her. But no, I had no idea that blurb a book, and you're the first one.
I have not yet seen the finished copy. I'm still waiting on them to come into my store.
Oh, you still okay? So yours is still the ARC.
Mm-hmm.
First person on the first page. There's Stephanie Carr, who now on the first page it says literary hype instead of literary hype woman. I think they did that so it wouldn't sound like it was somebody paid to work for us.
You know, that's a valid point. But Literary Hype is the name of the YouTube channel and the podcast, so it
Right,
works.
so that would be why, because that would be why they did it that way. There's a quote from one of the earlier books in here, and there it says literary hype woman, but that first one it says literary hype, and I get why they really wanted to just go with literary hype.
Which
They
that other one
discussed
was a
that.
total surprise to me too. When I got the arc, I was like, "You're too good to me." But for anyone who has not already seen Handmaid's Tale Psychology online, tell us a little bit about what this book is about and how you guys decided that this was the next project to work on.
Well, Wynn wanted to do it whether I would or not, so let's start with Wynn.
I did have to kind of convince you to do this one, Travis.
You did. It's because one. Okay, I said start with Wynn, and we go right to my answer. But you did have to sell me on it. I think in terms of the audience, and I knew it was not going to be the kind of fun most of these books are.
Usually we do like superheroes, that kind of thing, and they are really action-packed, lighthearted, happy ending, feel-good types of media. And this, I guess it's got some action. There are feel-good moments, but that's really not the vibe, right? But I've loved the world that Atwood created since I was in high school. And there's so much attention right now because of the Hulu show, because of the prequel sequel kind of mix of Atwood's second book. And I think also because of the attention that the book has gotten due to the election. I really wanted to focus on it because it's something that I've cared deeply about and because I think it's something that people are talking about right now. And I knew that really we could say a lot about the psychology in Atwood's world. And I knew that Travis would be into it as soon as he kind of listens to my advice.
I had to think about it. So it's like, well, it's okay. Well, Wynn wants to do this, regardless, and I want it to be the best it can be because it's important material, important things that we're talking about in here. Connie Santisteban, she was my original editor on Batman and Psychology. She was the editor who started the anthologies we were doing with Sterling Publishing. And even after she left them become an independent editor. She's wound up being copy editor and or line editor on all the more recent books because I told the publisher you need to get Connie involved. She's the there's going to be no publisher's editor who understands what we're doing on these books better than Connie. And Connie, so she has seen all these books all along the way, and she has said she thinks it's one of our best, and she also thinks it certainly has the what was the word? She was fishing for the word. The word she used was consequential, in terms of the importance of the subject matter.
I was definitely going to ask why now for this book to come out, especially with an election day release and a very heated, tense election year.
The number one reason on why now had to do with when Win was going to have a sabbatical.
That is true.
That's what it started with.
That's true. I did have a sabbatical. My university was very generous and gave me a sabbatical last year in the fall, which is when we asked our contributors to have their chapters initially due to us. And so just in terms of the timing of when we were able to co-edit the book, the timing really was helpful to me. So we didn't know it was going to come out on election day. That was just a coincidence, really.
Something the publisher did, I don't know if it was deliberate or not. It seems like it must have been deliberate. I haven't asked them. It's like, why in the world are you releasing on election day instead of 6 weeks earlier? They do try to time these things to coincide with some sort of public event. Like, oh, it should come out, a month before the start of a new season of Supernatural, or right before. And so we know from the history of these books that they definitely do better if there's some kind of tie-in event. Like when some TV shows new season got delayed, but the publisher stayed on schedule. The a book did not do as well as others. So there are those. But the Hulu show was the main thing. Is they were just gambling and not knowing. And they were ready to delay it if we found out when the new Hulu season would come out. We still don't know. And by the time they know, there might not be enough time for the release. But yeah, the election day, I honestly had hoped that releasing on an election day would seem like the dumbest decision in the world because within one day this would be just an irrelevant book. I really wanted our book to be irrelevant on its second day. And instead, unfortunately, it is terrifyingly more relevant than it was before.
What is your mental space like with this book coming out, with the timing and how the world is reacting to what's going on right now?
I have to say, I personally have been very troubled for the last couple of weeks, very anxious, very depressed because of how I see things changing, where I live. I'm very worried about the future. And the way that I can sort of assuage my own anxiety and depression and concern about the future is by telling myself hiding in my bed is not helping. So what can we do? And books like this are something that we can do. Helping people understand the psychology, the dynamics of a fictional dystopia, trying to make parallels between how this affects people's real lives. It's at least something that we can do to try to have some kind of effect on the world.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's this phrase I've been using for a long time about this filter of fiction, that we can look at very real human nature and very real concerns through the fictional examples because it's easier to talk about them than some equivalent things in real life. You can talk about a zombie outbreaks far more easily than Ebola. You can't have fun with Ebola. The Handmaid's Tale, you're getting into some tough subject matter. It's there. I've always found the Handmaid's Tale fascinating. That's the first book. The second book is a different kind of story. The sequel is a different kind of story. It's more adventurous. It's looking at different kinds of people. It's not I mean, the handmaid victims, they're practically mythological from the perspective of the characters in the Testaments And Hulu is going to do a series of the Testaments, which I look forward to that. That's and so, but there are some things that I don't want to analyze it, even if it is something that I could still talk about. I mean, we had done a number of YouTube videos, several that we were talking about The Handmaid's Tale back before or during the previous season of the show, or maybe it was 2 seasons ago. It was during lockdown. It must have been, or it was earlier. We were doing this. We did several for Wizard World. So we talked about them, analyzed them. But a book is a different issue because a book is one where you're dedicating a big portion of your life to living in this topic. And I would often tell people, it's like, yeah, I had fun writing this for 2 weeks, but been working on it all year. I love the writing process. I love every aspect of it. And there's some things like we had, I'm not going to use names, but we had one or two of our writers who had chapters that we're going to do that they could not bring themselves to write in the end. I had one of those myself. I really wanted to do a chapter on psychology of slavery, and Vanessa Hintz helped me brainstorm about this. Again, it's like I had it figured out, and I just could. If I'd had another month, I think I would have written the chapter. But I'd already had all these other months that I hadn't written it. Um, I mean, you look at the table of contents in there. I write some of the more upbeat stuff in the book, which it is important. There is hope all throughout The Handmaid's Tale. There is hope, even when the character, the unnamed protagonist of the novel, when she's in that darkest moment, when she says, "It's like, I'm not my real name. I am Offred." When she's in that moment, um, when she's at her most hopeless, that doesn't last. It's not that many pages later when she refers to her real name, because she knows Offred is not her real name. It's Atwood did says she did not intend for it to be June, but process of elimination still suggested it was June. It's There is hope. It's There's one of the things I've been doing since the election. Some of my social media has been more, don't say things that are dismissive of people's feelings and fears. Don't say it'll be all right. It might not be. It might eventually be all right. Some things will be all right, but just saying, "Oh, it'll be all right." That's what we call toxic positivity. That's dismissive of people's feelings, dismissive of the things that it's just not taking it seriously enough. Um, by trying to be upbeat. And you can be upbeat when talking about the worst things, but it's a matter of how you do it and what you're talking about. And one of the chapters I go through is like, what are people's strengths? What are psychological strengths that we see in these characters, that we see in real people, that are necessary for making things better and for us to have hope? Or a thing I commented the other day, which I've said before, it was in the Walking Dead book, which was the first of the anthologies. I mean, I was the sole author on the Batman book, but the first of these anthologies where we're pulling different people together. The first one was the Walking Dead psychology, Psych of the Living Dead. And there was this comment I had in there about how, when things are hopeless, you at least might hope for hope itself. You hope you can find a reason to hope. And when you've even lost that hope, it's like that's a different level of, so there are levels of hopelessness. And there are a lot of folks like who've been making comments about how they want to hope. It's like, okay, well, that's the thing I'm talking about. And there are the strengths that can help us through those. As I think it's important I think it's important to finish the book on some of the things that give us a future. So, like the next to last chapter, I'm talking about these strengths. The last chapter, I'm talking about the futures. It's more about the sequel. It's more about the daughters. Although the final word had to be wins. She wrote the afterword, and you wrote the first of our two intros. Wynn and I each wrote an introduction. So I made sure, by gosh, a dude was not going to get the first and last word in the book, The Handmaid's Tale Psychology.
What are some of the topics that are included in this book that really resonated with you as co-editors and authors and researchers.
Yeah, I'll start. So Travis has mentioned a couple of the chapters that he wrote himself. I'll mention the two that I wrote myself, but then I'll also mention a couple that other people wrote that I really enjoyed reading. So I co-authored one chapter with a colleague of mine here at the university that's on basically the importance of freedom of speech and what it feels like to be silenced and have that freedom taken away, but not just the effect of you as an individual when your speech has been taken away, but how that affects this whole society. How when you take away a particular group's ability to speak or basically the civil rights of that, that it has negative effects that kind of permeate out. I also wrote a chapter on one of my research areas is domestic violence. And so the psychological abuse that happens in a domestic violent situation in a individual relationship, how if you took that microcosm and expanded it to the macrocosm of a dystopia society, how The Handmaid's Tale reflects that kind of psychological abuse that we see in that world. So things like isolating people, economic abuse, gaslighting, things like that. Some of the chapters that other people wrote that I found really interesting were we have a chapter on the leadership in the government and the propaganda and the authoritarianism that we see and how that kind of leads to fascism. So I found that a particularly engaging chapter and one that I think is relevant to many governments around the world right now. I also really found the chapter on evolutionary psychology particularly interesting and how people sort of use evolutionary instincts sometimes as justification for bad behavior. So they say like, well, I can't help it. I just have this instinct to be bad, or, I have an instinct to, spread my genetic seed or something like that. And so you can have crimes basically and then justify your crimes by saying, well, it's just human instinct. I found that a fascinating argument.
Yeah, the chapters on morality struck a note with me. Growing up in the southern United States, in maybe next, not the buckle of the Bible Belt, but somewhere nearby, some of those issues where people tie moral issues into religious issues, because those are separate issues. Morality is not the same as religion, even though for some people they'll be tied up. And I know people who don't understand somebody having morality without religion. The chapter is talking about those issues, like Daniel Hand's chapter and some of those others. I mean, we've got a couple of chapters um, with racial issues being brought up and the erasure. Honestly, because of Hulu making sure to have a more diverse cast, which of course they did, erases the racial issues. Even though it's like, The Handmaid's Tale wasn't about racial issues. Yeah, and that was part of the problem. And they even because it was a white supremacist nation, they sent every African American off to someplace in Colorado where you weren't sure if they had all been exterminated or not. And then there's a shot of it in the movie, so yeah, you have the racially diverse cast, and it is important, but you end up losing the fact that white supremacism, white supremacy, well, they're both words, includes very much racism. You end up being, when you're so focused on the sexism, because that is absolutely essential for The Handmaid's Tale, you can still touch on the fact that extreme sexism often goes hand in hand with racism. And it is kind of ironic that having a racially diverse cast meant you dropped a racial issue. That I absolutely understand why Hulu had to do that, and they're great actors throughout the show. But the racial, even in the sequel, The Testaments, there's a reference to committee looking at the genocidal crimes that were going on. It's still just a passing reference, but it then that gets to some acknowledgement. Yeah, there was extermination going on, racially based. But these are characters who are living in their very limited environment. In The Handmaid's Tale, in the first novel, her world is tiny. You know, there's a big world, so much us going on, but she is so isolated, so lonely, so much of the time, and it's very personal. It's inside her head, throughout what's going on as part of what they're telling for the story. Um, and her for her story, it is the Handmaid's Tale, apostrophe S, not S apostrophe. It's about that one handmaid, her individual tale, her individual experience, and that is very much part of what authoritarian dominators want to do. They want to keep everybody isolated. They want to keep people uneducated. They want to just how far do I go when we start talking about some of the things going on in our world now, when they are interfering with the educational process, are finding ways to make education worse, where the United States should have the best education system in the world and does not. And then there are these handmaids who they're not allowed to read. And in the sequel, you get one of the daughters, the one who's grown up in America. She's illiterate. She learns to read, but she reaches her teens illiterate. And these are terrifying things. You should want your population to be healthy, fed, educated, and there are people and they're actively working against that and expect to see more blatant efforts against that in the next couple of years.
I'll mention that while I think that the Hulu show does kind of erase the racism that Atwood does mention some in the book, I do think that the show does a good job of adding some heterosexism issues and talking about like the gender traders and the intersectionality of characters like Moira, who has and Emily, right, being lesbian characters, and so it does add that dimension, which I think Atwood didn't really focus on very much in the book. So I did like that addition in the Hulu show.
Yeah, Moira and Emily, not that she's called Emily. Well, in the novel, Moira and Emily were each gay. But and that's why, Emily got shipped off and before she's given a name. But and so they were there, but since that wasn't the handmaid's, that wasn't the Offred's personal
Right.
experience, you still only saw some of what was being done to others, to other people, and that feeling where it's like, yeah, you're not gonna focus on as much. Hulu does get to explore these characters. We get to see scenes from Moya's point of view. We get to see a lot of scenes from Emily's point of view. I miss Emily, and I've never heard for certain why. I can imagine Alexis Bledsoe may have reached the point where she just couldn't keep doing that.
Yeah. It's a
Because it
hard
does sound, it
character.
was very much about her choice. And the showrunner said, we still have more story we want to tell with Emily. She's welcome to come back. And so it was, and in those regards, she parted on good terms. But it was her herself that she chose not to continue. And that had to have been hard on a person. Like, just writing this book is hard. Working on there are some of these things. Like when I was doing the Joker book, I spent so much time looking at some of the world's worst criminals. I had to take a 6 month break from working on the books, and I enjoyed most of the process on that, but on that particular book. But still, it was a very difficult subject matter. We're getting into a lot of difficult topics in this one. You're getting into rape. We're getting into abuse. So one of the things I talk about at the beginning of the book, you're not going to see spoiler warnings or trigger warnings. But I'm also telling everybody, as you're writing it, you need to make sure you're still conveying the same sense of what people are going to read. Your title needs to make it clear. Your opening paragraph needs to make it clear what is about to be there, even if we're not doing the so-called trigger warning. I mean, one argument could be the whole book itself is a trigger warning.
While you were doing the research for this book and like reading Handmaid's Tale over again, watching the show, is there any details that really stood out to you that you didn't notice initially?
A lot. I mean, there are going to be lots of little things that you're catching here and there. There would be some connections. It's like one line from a later season. It's oh, that's echoing this thing that was said back then. I've seen it 5 times, and I just now caught that. Um, or as a rewatching it and rereading the book close together, I was also noticing how many lines from the book are used in the show. So some of those kinds of things. Uh,
I did notice one thing just because it was sort of an art imitates life and life imitates art connection. So we knew we were going to be doing the book, and I had started to think about my chapters and reread the books and watch the show when I was doing a Spanish language immersion with some of my students from the university in Spain. And we were touring some old cathedrals, and the tour guide told us that sometimes people come to the statue of the Virgin Mary and leave gifts. And it made me think of in the Testaments when people
mm.
leave gifts to the statue of Aunt Lydia, and they leave oranges and eggs and things like that. And the eggs are for fertility. Travis, you look.
No, it's just hit me. It's like, why the hell did that not hit me when I was going through the Testaments?
Well,
I've read that book twice and listened to the audiobook over and over and never really thought about that being parallel to leaving these things at those statues like you're talking about. Like they're treating her Lydia like a living religious figure.
right. So he's explaining that people leave these gifts to the statue of the Virgin Mary, and he says young brides have a tradition of leaving eggs, and and no one knows why. There's no explanation for this in the history of Catholicism. And I said, excuse me, sir. I believe it's because they're young brides and it's a symbol of fertility, like in Easter. And I know that's a, appropriation of a pagan holiday, but that's why they're associated with Easter because of rebirth and fertility. And that's why they're leaving eggs if they're brides. And it was like I exploded his brain. And he said, I have to change my entire, part of this tour now. And so it just made me sort of chuckle that Atwood figured this out a while ago.
That was brilliant. She is. She's an amazing writer, very thoughtful. I love watching interviews with her.
Has she reached out or you heard anything from her
No,
in
she
regards to
she
this?
does not. She's open to people doing things, but she does not. Um, yeah, that's one very specific thing because so many people have done things analyzing her works. She says like don't ask her, and she does not reach out. She'll find out.
What do you hope people learn or take away from this book into their own lives?
I hope so many things, and it's good that I still have hope, as Travis was saying earlier. I hope that it reminds people that we need to be respectful of all people, that people's body autonomy is important, that we can't make choices on behalf of another person, that religion and politics should remain separate, that we need to maintain freedom of speech, that we need to maintain civil rights. I mean, these are these big picture political hopes. So I guess my hope is that when people read our book and Atwood's book and watch the show, that it's a reminder of the principles that I think the United States is founded on in terms of the Constitution and why those principles matter.
Earlier part of the book in particular, I think, cautions people about, well, it's like, two of the chapters are all outright about can it happen here? One of them, that's part of the title, asking, what can happen in our world? And I mean, the entire first section of the book, really, all four of those chapters, are getting into that issue of things to be alert for, reasons to be scared, and reasons to be scared and reasons to hope together. It's, not just scared, because that'll just lead into being depressed. Somebody who just lives in fear is going to go, what's the point? And there are a lot of folks out there. There's some Russian bots and memes and others, trying to tell you it's pointless. Don't bother voting. It's like, oh, why put your effort into fighting over two guys who don't know anything about you anyway? That just lends itself to whoever's the bigger monster in the group. It's because there are those out there. There are those out there pushing one candidate, those out there pushing another, and then there are those trying real hard to suppress the others from voting. That apathy, apathy is a defense against the fear. There are reasons for some of that apathy because it is very stressful. Hope can lead you to also being very nervous about the future. But it's like people who dwell more on the past have higher depression rate. People who dwell more on the future have higher anxiety rate on average. On average, we don't want to overgeneralize that. And so there also needs to be as well, where are you in this moment? And just stop and think and be mindful of where you are. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to that combination, reasons to fear and reasons to hope.
What was your guys' process like for editing this book together?
Yeah, that is always an issue. I had wanted Win to do more of it, but some of it had to do with our timing, because of when the production schedule fell relative to her sabbatical. It affected who was going to do more of the editing at which stage.
Yeah, so this is our second book that we've co-edited together, actually. The first was The Westworld. We always, I think, negotiate who's going to take the first pass that the authors send to us and who versus the second and potentially the third, depending on sort of where the first draft is. And then there are other negotiations. So things like making sure that it's following the formatting or, language punctuation types of things versus more content types of things. I think this time around, you took the first pass and I took the second pass, maybe.
Yeah, the original plan had been the other way around, but that didn't work with your sabbatical schedule. So
Right,
I
because
took
I
the
was
first
I was
pass.
in
You took
Spain, I think.
Yeah. And even with, I mean, we each received all the first pass stuff and all the second pass stuff. And even the one who that wasn't their primary pass would weigh in on some things.
Right,
As I'm doing the first pass stuff, there would be some in particular I would ask Win, would you please check this?
right.
Because, I remember it wasn't the first pass, it was later when it suddenly hit me. It's like, I don't think this thing was ever said anywhere in there. And she and I were both going through and checking. There was somebody's interpretation of something. It was a racial
Yeah.
issue. There's like, I don't think
Yeah.
that's in there.
It was specifically about a comment in terms of like, how did Jezebel's look or who was working in Jezebel's? And so then we had to look up every single reference to Jezebel's in the book and read that very, very carefully it was basically fact checking one of the authors.
And we were further along before that one hit me.
Right,
It had gone through the first and second pass before we realized, wait, we need to check this.
right. And it turned out that I think the author was wrong. And so
The author was wrong.
we had to change the wording of that.
The author thought there was a greater racial mix among the women at Jezebel's in the novel. And it's like, okay, that's in the show,
Right.
but it's just like that's not in the novel. There are people, some of the clients. It's hard to say customers when they're not paying, but anyway, some of the customers. Oh, it was the customers' racial mix. That
Yeah.
was it. It wasn't the women. It was the customers. And I was like, I don't think that's there.
And I think the costumes were described as exotic costumes, but not the people wearing the costumes.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, this factual thing. In terms of the basic style, this is one that's like we got to go with what's consistent with how we've done on the previous books. And I've developed our own style guide that we use from book to book, and then we'll tweak it too, because there could be one thing that this is how we've always done it, and decide no, it needs to be done differently in this book. And so I've got our own quirky style guide, which, okay, follow APA except for this 4-page list of things where I say we're not following APA. Well, actually, a big part of that list is spelling.
And you guys have a ton of references and notes at the end for people who do want to dig more. What's it like compiling that massive list and making sure all those studies are correct?
Time consuming, but I weirdly like it.
Yeah, I actually agree. I have some weird like thing in my brain where I like to do APA style and like make sure that all the commas are not in italics and like this weird like I feel a sense of closure when I get it done. So it's sort of like, oh no, I have to do it, but I kind of secretly like it.
In writing, I like every step of the process. I know writers who they hate the research, or I'll know who writers they like everything except the actual writing it down. It's like I like the planning, the thinking. I love writing a book proposal. I love thinking about what we're going to do, and the writing and the editing I like everything except for dealing with lawyers.
What was it like getting Yvonne, who played Serena Joy on Hulu show, to be part of this book in a very small fashion?
Oh, that's just a Jenna Bush interviewed her on a red carpet. And we were able to use it.
Travis, what is the next book that you're working on?
Secret.
I
The,
don't like when you keep secrets from me.
the next thing I'm doing is going to be a single author book because I need to do one just myself. Actually, I've got a stack of books I want to write myself, but is we've got this group of people, and we always have new people almost every time we have somebody new and joining in the mix. I can't remember for sure if we had somebody completely new on Stranger Things because I wasn't going to recruit people on Stranger Things because we all agreed up front we're not making a cent on this. We're donating the money. And it turned out this time too, but that was after the fact. One of the writers wanted to donate it, and then everybody wanted to donate it to RAIN, rape, abuse, incest.
I wrote it down. It's the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Yeah.
That just evolved after the fact. But we always have some different people. We have this group of people who are eager to do things, and people always throwing ideas at us, always.
Well, thanks so much for hanging out and talking with Literary Hype about The Handmaid's Tale psychology, seeing off-read.
I'll just say thank you for having both of us. And I just really hope for hope, like Travis said. And I know that this is a difficult book. A lot of my friends have said, oh, I can't watch the show or I can't read the books because the subject matter is so hard. And I completely understand that. And people need to protect their mental health. But I would say you also can't ignore these issues, right? You can't bury your head in the sand. And especially with the way I see some of our world going, these are relevant issues. These are things that people have to care about. And if we don't pay attention, it'll be too late.
I was doing a whole lot of screen captures over here so I could use one to talk it up. And it's like, okay, we're smiling in too many of these. But it's what you have to do. You have to be able to find. It's like when you're reading a book where not one character in this entire book ever laughs, not one character in the entire book ever makes a joke. That just says something about the writer. It doesn't necessarily mean the writer is humorless. It could mean they don't know how to write it. Because in any situation, somebody's going to have a sense of humor. It gets harder after a while. It may even just be sarcastic sense of humor, but any time I mean, some of the most laughter I ever hear is after a funeral. When people are sharing stories of the person who's gone or talking about other things. It's humor is a survival mechanism. Smiling is a survival mechanism. Forcing yourself to smile releases some endorphins that tricks the brain into thinking you were smiling for a good reason. It's always good talking to you, Steph.
Thanks to Travis and Wynn for hanging out with me to discuss their book, The Handmaid's Tale Psychology, and the vast array of topics that could cover. If you'd like to get your hands on this book, the links to do so are down in the description for you. And this is one of the few that does have an audiobook from Dr. Langley. So definitely check that out. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Literary Hype YouTube channel if you've not done so already, and click that little bells for notifications whenever I post a new video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.